Hey everybody, I'm Mike Bruning, and on today's episode of The Film Cage, I'll be interviewing John Holmquist, director on the hit show Family Guy. So if you're a huge fan of the show and you love animation, or maybe you're even thinking about getting a career started in the field of animation, stick around. You don't want to miss this. John breaks it all down for us. But before we get started, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. Here's my interview. Before we get into the weeds on Family Guy, I like to step back in time, kind of learn about people's history, what got them interested in what they're doing. So tell me, what got you interested in animation?
As a young boy growing up, I enjoyed cartoons, but I never really thought much about working in them. I did enjoy drawing, and I always had a love for drawing cartoons and just drawing wildlife and things around my neighborhood where I lived up in Alaska.
What
Um,
were you drawing? Like a moose? What?
Eagles, moose. Actually, when I was younger, it was dinosaurs. I was big into dinosaurs.
Really?
Monsters, dinosaurs. I kind of had a creature infatuation. So scary things.
So did that come like naturally to you? Like drawing, was it just a natural thing? Did you have to learn or?
um, I think I just had a lot of opportunities to draw because of the weather in Alaska, which was kind of dark and dreary and wet most of the year. And so I had to find things to entertain myself. And one of those things was drawing. I had lots of drawing pads all over the house, and I would just take my crayons and markers and start doodling. And I didn't necessarily enjoy these things I would get for my birthday, where you're supposed to color in like a moose or anything like that that's already drawn for me. I always enjoyed creating creatures and new environments in my sketchbooks.
Yeah,
So I did
no
that.
coloring books for John.
Pardon me.
No coloring books for
No paint
you.
by numbers for me. Although I have probably a couple dozen that are still in the box up in Alaska, if anyone's interested. Elk in the woods, uh, grizzly bear coming out of a river with a fish in its mouth. It's great stuff like that.
So that sort of parlay, did you start getting more interested in animation at a certain point as you were growing up?
I didn't really. I did cartoons a lot. I worked on the paper when I was in high school. I was in the journalism class, and the newspaper. I was part of that. I did little cartoon strips for the paper that I enjoyed doing, but I never really thought about parlaying that into animation necessarily. But it wasn't until The Simpsons came on back in the late '80s. I think it was '89 when they started up.
The shorts were, I believe, on the Tracy
Tracy
Ullman
Ullman show, right?
show. Yeah.
Tracy Ullman had Simpsons shorts on her show initially, and then Fox saw the popularity in that, or the possibility of a popularity in that beyond just shorts, and picked it up for a series. And it was watching this series up in Washington with my roommates at the time on Sunday nights. I thought, that looks like it would be fun. I'll bet I could do that. And it was more adult geared. It was kind of prime time animation. I
Right.
didn't really have an interest in working in children's animation necessarily, and I couldn't even tell you some of the shows that were on the air at the time because I just didn't watch that. I didn't watch cartoons. But I thought to myself, I think I could do that. I could animate if I had an opportunity. So I was working for a T-shirt company for about a year that folded, and when they went out of business, I decided I don't want to look for graphic design jobs anymore in Seattle. I think I'm going to move down to California and see if I can get a job on The Simpsons.
Cool. Bold ambition.
So yeah, I packed up everything I owned in my Ford Bronco 2 at the time that I had just purchased from my father, who was a Ford dealer up in Alaska. And I drove from Washington to Lancaster, where I had a friend of mine from college that lived, said I could crash on her couch for a few days. And did that trip in like 2 days, I think, from Seattle. And then I have one contact in Los Angeles. She was a woman, and I know I have her name somewhere, and I should call her and thank her because she was the sorority sister of one of my roommate's brother's wife. and and at a dinner one night in Washington before I left, uh, at their house, at my roommate's brother's house. His wife asked me, well, what are you going to do when you get to LA? And I said, well, I'm just going to start knocking on studio doors and showing my portfolio around. And she said, do you have any contacts? And I said, no, I do not. And she said, well, I have a sorority sister who's down there. She works on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And maybe she knows someone at The Simpsons that she could put you in touch with. Here's her number. Give her a call when you get into town. So I did that, and she said, as a matter of fact, I called her up, and she was very nice. And I said, could I come by and meet with you for a few minutes one day? And she said, sure. And we scheduled a time, and I went by this post-production house in Hollywood where she was doing some post work on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we met out in the parking lot for like 10 minutes. And I told her who I was and what I was trying to do, get a job in animation in LA. And did she know anyone at Klasky Chupo, which was the animation house that did the animation for The Simpsons at the time? And she goes, in fact, I do. Here's his name. Give him a call. So I called him up. He was a producer on a new show that they were just gearing up to start production on, called Rugrats. And so he goes, well, come on in. We'd love to look at your portfolio. And so I came in, I dropped off my portfolio. He said, would you mind taking a test? He said, we have a test for character design and a test for animation. You take these tests home, bring them back in a week, turn them in, and we'll get back to you. So I did that. I took these 2 tests home. I did some character design work for Rugrats, and then I did an animation test for The Simpsons. I turned them both in. A week later, I called back and said, hey, what'd you think of my tests? And they said, well, you obviously know nothing about animation because your animation test was terrible. But we do like your character design work. Would you be interested in being a character designer on a new show we have called Rugrats, which we're just starting on? And I said, hey, I'm in. Any job in animation I'll take. And it sounds great.
That's cool. But up until that point, like, what was in your portfolio if you were doing graphic design? Did you include other elements?
I had illustrations. I'd done some cartoon work for some companies that did seminars. And so I did little birds with graduation caps and glasses and, pointing sticks, pointing to charts and stuff. I did a lot of graphics for orientation meetings for this company. I also did some graphics for an aeration station, sewage treatment company that was actually, it was for this engineering company that built these treatment facilities. But I did a lot of graphics for that too that involved characters, walking around big aeration stations and other filter things. And it was kind of a charts showing how the sewage was treated. So I had small pictures, and these were big, they were big displays that they would have printed on these large foam core pieces of mat board and what have you. And I'd take photos of them. And so I had pictures of those in my portfolio, in addition to some t-shirt design work that I had done, probably half of which was cartoonish stuff that I would ski.
So how long were you doing the character design on Rugrats? Like, what does that involve? Were they lead characters, secondary characters? How does that work?
A little bit of both. Most of the primary characters for Rugrats, Tommy Pickles, his mom, his dad, Spike the dog, the grandfather, Angelica, Phil and Lil, all the main characters had been designed by the time I can take credit for designing Reptar, the giant dinosaur monster that Tommy was watching on TV a lot in certain episodes. Chucky Finster's father, Charles Finster, I designed. The Carmichael family, which was the African-American family that appeared in the series, I think second or third season. I designed Susie, her brother, the mother, the father. And then they were just, like you said, miscellaneous characters that would maybe come and do 1 or 2 episodes. So I would get a script. I would, circle the new characters that were going to appear in that script, and it was my job to create them based on any information in the script or that I got back from the directors. You know, I would talk to the directors and say, "What are you thinking for this character? How old?" Um, so that's what a character designer does, basically. And then we didn't have the internet back then. We did have these books called Faces International,
Oh,
which
wow.
were giant catalogs of actors and actresses who would pay to have a page in this, and they would dress up in, you know, different costumes, and then they had their agent's number and everything. But they were all kinds of different, you know, ages and nationalities, and so we'd look through that book sometimes for a reference on, you know, an idea of a character, maybe a hairstyle or something that we were looking for. I remember those books were pretty handy at the time.
So were you drawing everything by hand at that time? Were you using computers?
No, everything was on paper still. Yeah, we were drawing on animation discs, um, on drafting tables with lamps. It was pretty simple setups.
Wow. And
Yeah,
then you moved into like a storyboard artist, right?
I did. I did. I did some storyboard revision work first, and then moved into storyboards after about, well, I think I was a character designer for 2 years, revisionist for a year, and then after 3 years, I became a storyboard artist. And then I learned a little timing during that time, work, learned about camera work and all the other aspects of animation. And then I didn't actually start directing until I think I left Klasky Csupo, and I had been there for 7 years. I left to go work at Hanna-Barbera on a show called Cow and Chicken.
Hmm.
It was on back in '96, I want to say. And I was a storyboard artist there for 6 months. They had canceled Rugrats, and after 3 seasons, they had canceled it. But I got a call one day from the old producer on Rugrats, and she said, "Hey, Nickelodeon wants to restart the series. Would you be interested in coming back as a board artist to work on Rugrats?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "If I come back to work on Rugrats, I want to direct." And she said, "Okay." And that's how I got my first directing job.
Oh,
But
that is so cool.
while I was over at Hanna-Barbera working on Cow and Chicken, I had the opportunity to work with Seth MacFarlane. That's where I met him for the first time. He was a young uh, animator that was in these, what did they call them? Gosh, they had like an incubator or something. He was working on different projects. If you had a short film that maybe they could spin off into a series, they would put you in an office and let you work on it for 6 months to a year until you had a finished product, and then they would show it. I think that's how Powerpuff Girls and Johnny Bravo and Dexter's Lab all kind of got their start too. But Gendy Tartakovsky, who's done very well with Samurai Jack and Primal. Have you seen that? I don't
Oh
know,
yeah, it's amazing.
dinosaur caveman epic that he's come up with for Cartoon Network. Just amazing stuff. He was over there. A lot of talented guys over there at the time, and I didn't really necessarily work with them on anything, but Seth did come in one day and polished up a script or an outline that I'd been working on. We needed a few jokes, so they called in Seth. He did some stunt casting, writing, and that's where I met him for the first time. I think he was like 21, 22 years old, right out of school.
Oh my God, what a great experience.
Yeah, but that's how I met Seth for the first time. And then I went back to Klasky Csupo and directed for a few years, and I got a call from Peter Shin one day, who is a friend of mine that actually is the creative director, supervising director on Family Guy now. He and I had worked together on The Simpsons and Rugrats a little bit. And he said, "Hey, I've got an opportunity. I need a director over here on Seth MacFarlane's new show, Family Guy. Would you be interested?" And that's how I directed on the first season of Family Guy. I went over there and directed one episode on the first season, episode 11, called Running Mates. And it was all about Peter running for school board president against Lois. So I directed one episode of Family Guy, and then I went back to Klasky Csupo to work on several of their Rugrats movies that they were doing for Nickelodeon and Paramount. I did that for, 5-6 years, I think.
Let's talk a little bit about your work on The Simpsons.
Okay. It was a short stint that I did on Simpsons. I think I was there for 6 months, maybe less. I think I might have been there more like 4 months, but I worked on 6 episodes. I think that's what it was. I was there after the first season of Rugrats. We were waiting to hear back from Nickelodeon as to whether or not they wanted to pick up another season of Rugrats. And during the interim, they said, we don't want to lay you off. We want to keep you in case they pick up the show for another season. And you're cheap enough that we can afford to pay you to stick around. And they said, would you be interested in doing character designs and props on The Simpsons? And I said, hell yeah, that's what I came here for initially. And so I worked in the character design. I worked in the design department with the character, background, and prop designers, and did some light character design work and mostly prop stuff for about 4 months, I think. And then Nickelodeon came back and said, yes, we definitely want more episodes of Rugrats. Let's get another season going. And I left the character design department and went back to doing characters on Rugrats.
So let's dive into Family Guy. So you said you already worked on season 1. When did you come back, and how did you get back involved with Seth MacFarlane, and what was that experience like?
After 5 years, I think, back at Klasky Csupo working on some feature films and other TV shows, I left to go work on a show called Father the Pride over at DreamWorks, which was a CGI animated primetime series for NBC based on Siegfried and Roy and their animal menagerie that they used in their magic show at the time. Well, that was short-lived after Roy Horn was mauled by one of his tigers during a live performance.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, the Mirage. That was kind of the end of Siegfried and Roy in Vegas, and kind of the end of Father the Pride. Before it even aired, this had happened.
Oh, no.
So they cut me loose. I was unemployed for 2 weeks. And I got a call from Peter Shin again saying, hey, they've decided to restart Family Guy. They did 2.5 seasons of Family Guy and then pulled the plug on it. But it became more and more popular over time. People were buying DVDs of it so they could watch it. It had a really good cult following among college students and 30-year-olds. And they said, we need more of these. Seth asked Seth if he'd be interested in bringing the show back. And he said yes. And so I got a call from Peter just as they were about to get back their first episode from animation in Korea. And he said, we don't have a director spot for you, but we need a post, a retake director.
Can you just explain to everybody what the role of the retake director is?
Sure. So retake director is responsible for implementing any rewrites that the writers decide need to be made once a show comes back in color animated, or fixing creative retakes, new animation that maybe isn't working quite right, so we have to restructure the animation so it looks better and plays clearer. I also was responsible for dealing with technical retakes, which are mistakes that the studio makes when they're animating a scene. Something isn't animated correctly. It's my job to kind of point out what's wrong with it and how to fix it. But I was all by myself for like 3 months, I remember. Anyways, I did that for 2 years, and then one of our directors on the show moved on to another series or something else, and an opportunity to step in and direct again came up, and Shannon Smith, our producer, offered it to me, and I took it. I've been doing that for the past 15 years now, I think.
tell everyone what it's like to work with Seth MacFarlane on this show.
Well, it used to be very hard to actually get a meeting with Seth. He was a very busy guy when he was in studio the first, 5 or 6 years before he started doing movies. He was always in the writer's room, I remember, or in his office on a phone call. And I think he was there probably more hours than anyone when we first started up the new season of Family Guy. He was probably putting in 60-hour weeks easy. I think he was even doing voices on the weekends sometimes. We built a in-studio record booth where he could just step in there on his lunch break sometimes and record voices for any of the characters that we needed new lines for or retakes for. But he was very busy. I remember, when I did need to meet with him or he needed to meet with me, I would call his secretary and they would say, okay, he's in the writer's room, but he'd be out in 20 minutes. Can you be down here in 10, just in case he gets out early? And so I would stand next to the cubicle where his secretary was, next to it, between him there and the door, and he would just breeze through into his door and they'd go ahead, go in. And I'd go in there with a question, and he'd always give me great sketches. He's a really fast artist, and he's got really fixed ideas of what he wants, and they're very clear, and he does it very quickly and gives you great direction, and you know exactly what he's going for by the time you leave. They'll give you, like I said, a couple Post-its or some verbal cues to go by, and if you had a meeting with Seth and he was able to explain to you what he wanted, you always gave him. It was easy to give him what he wanted because he was very clear about it.
And the show's so funny, so that has to be like one of the enjoyable aspects of working on a project like this.
Yeah. No, I to be honest, it's probably one of the few jobs I've had where honestly I can go in on any given day and get a good 2 or 3 good gut laughs, from the scripts or someone else's animatic screening or a color screening or something that someone says. I mean, animators for the most part are a pretty jovial group. Some are a little less, outgoing than others. We're also very kind of a quiet group that likes to sit and just draw and do our thing.
Right.
But doing that for too long, you need an outlet at some point too. So it is a great way to make a living. It's a great, funny career to be involved in, and I work with a lot of great people.
So can you kind of break down the process for us? Like, how does it work with an episode, or from the writing to completion?
Okay, so the writers, I probably not going to get this right. I don't know how much time they spend on the actual script, but I know they do a board every season where they come up with show ideas. They'll come up with 20, say there's 20 episodes in a season, they'll come up with 20 show ideas. And then they'll kind of outline each show idea. They'll come up with gags that can go within each act. And then they'll hand that idea for a script off to usually a team of writers. If they're younger writers, they're usually in a team. If they're older, more seasoned writers, they'll get a whole episode all to themselves. So anyways, those guys will take away the script for a couple weeks, do a rough draft. They'll all sit around the writer's room, look at the script and break it down, what's working, what's not, come up with new gags, send them off for another week. They incorporate those new gags back in the writer's room, tear it apart, put it back together. I think this goes on for like maybe a month. I don't know the specifics. I should, but I know it goes on for several weeks to a month, maybe more. And then we have a table read where all the used to be the actors that do voices in our show, Mila Kunis, Seth Green, Seth MacFarlane, Mike Henry, who does Cleveland. They would all show up and they'd sit at the table in the middle of our conference room with all the other writers, and they would do basically a radio play of the show. And then the crew would gather around in seats around the table. And I think you've been to one of these, Mike, haven't you?
No, but I'm willing to go whenever they come back.
We'll have to get you in for one. They used to be a lot more celebrity filled, but Seth hasn't done one in quite some time. They divide up all of Seth's lines between 2 to 3 other writers these days that kind of do Peter. Another one does Stewie. Another one does the Quagmire, Brian. But it used to be really interesting to sit there in the conference room and watch Seth just pop from one character to another. And sometimes he'd be having a conversation between Stewie and Brian, and it was just seamless. It was like there were 2 people in the room having this conversation. And just to see his voice turn on a dime was always kind of entertaining, and so you watch the curl of his lip change for Peter. He kind of does this thing where he talks out of the corner of his mouth when he's doing Peter. And so there's this facial expressions that go along with these individual characters. It's always
What about Stewie?
Yeah, he does kind of a squinty, thing to get the Stewie. It is definitely a different facial expression for each character that he does. He kind of morphs into that character. You can see it cross his face instantly as soon as he does the voice. So those are fun. So we do a table read. We get everyone's reaction to the jokes that are written into the script. Jokes that don't get laughs get thrown out and replaced with new jokes. And then that new script lands on my desk usually a week or 2 later after it's kind of polished up a bit more. And it's my job as a director to divide up the script between 4 storyboard artists that I'm assigned. And then I have, according to our producer, 7 weeks to storyboard that show. And that involves doing all the staging, any design work for new locations, new characters, all the acting for individual characters, effects that need to happen. Those have to be spelled out. We do a thumbnail stage initially where, just little rough, really sketchy drawings, and then we expand on that and clean those up based on the composition, whether or not we like those. We do 8 panels, which are background setups for each individual scene. And then lastly, we do rough acting pass. And I give notes during each phase of each one of those things, the thumbnail stage, the 8-panel stage, the rough acting pass. I give notes. My board artists address those notes. We get a nice tied down storyboard, and then that goes in front of the writers, Peter Shin, supervising directors, James Purdom or Dom Bianchi. And we get a slew of notes back that we need to address. And we address all those notes, and then we build an animatic, which is kind of a rough version of the animation that we will see when we get back final animation from our studio Emation. And then we do little tweaks after we do a screening of that animation. There's another rewrite process that happens where jokes that don't receive big enough laughs, or maybe there's little story points that need to be fleshed out or addressed. More board work happens, and then we do timing pass and design pass. That's where I am right now in this current episode that I'm working on currently, is the design pass. So all the designers, character designers, prop designers, background designers are designing new locations, props, and characters within the storyboard. And I give notes on those too, and we change those a little bit, finesse those. And then the show all gets shipped over to Korea, where it sits for 4 months with their animation team over there. And then after 4 months, we get a completed color animated show back.
So one of the things I'm wondering about is how does being a director in animation, how does it correlate to live action? Let's say, like, are you coming up with shots? Like, you want to have a shot, or are you working with a team on deciding, like, how are we going to frame this? What's it going to look like?
Some of the times, if there's a specific shot that we're parodying, like the Shawshank Redemption scene at the end where Tim Robbins comes crawling out of the sewer and kind of stands up in the rain and he's free at last, and it's kind of a nice truck out from him with a twist. I mean, we'll do shots like that from time to time for dramatic purposes, and those need to be kind of spelled out for the board artist. Usually we'll say, it's the Shawshank Redemption shot, the down shot.
Right.
If you want something like that specifically done, it's usually called out for in the script, but sometimes we'll have to come up with those on our own too, and say this is the kind of shot that I want for this particular scene to emphasize the dramatic point in this dialogue that's just been made. So yeah, it's usually the director's choice to kind of make those decisions, or the writers incorporate something specific that they want to see in the episode a lot of the time too. But our board artists, it's up to them to kind of draw it out. And I'll do a rough thumbnail and say, this is what the camera start position should be tight here on the face of this character, and then truck out to look down and show all the landscape and everything behind them. And rain coming in from the foreground, and splashing down in the water around them. All that stuff kind of needs to be topped out. And that's my job.
Right. I mean, you're overseeing so many different things.
Yeah. And then this is the character that I've sketched out that I want you to use for this scene.
Yeah. So tell me a couple of your favorite episodes that you've directed over the years.
I think one of my favorite episodes was a episode based on Taken, the Liam Neeson movie. Meg is abducted on a trip to Europe with a couple of her girlfriends and sold into the sex slave trade. And who was it? Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think Stewie and Brian are ultimately responsible for going and rescuing her in France. And it's just got some great action scenes in it and some really funny moments. Peter, of course, is oblivious to the whole thing. He has the conversation with the guy who abducted his daughter at one point, and he explains all the things that he has that are important to him, and they add up to about $15 is the money that he has to offer this person in order to get back Meg. And so anyway, Stewie and Brian end up going and rescuing her, and it has a very unforeseen ending, I think, with Meg almost finding true love once again, but then the rug being pulled out from underneath her. I'll just say that without giving too much away, in case anyone wants to go check it out.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen that episode, go check it out now.
Yeah, that one and Yacht Rocky. Yacht Rocky's a fun action adventure, kind of based on the Poseidon Adventure, of course, where Peter and the guys end up going on a 1970s yacht rock cruise with their wives and the kids, and the boat gets hit by a wave, and they have to make their way toward the engine room where the propeller shaft is only an inch thick steel, so that they can be rescued. And again, Meg almost finds true love.
All right, John, thanks for being on the show today. It's been really fun and informative.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
And don't forget, everybody, go out there, watch Family Guy, and go back and check out Rugrats in Paris. Classic.